Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we explore how work is changing one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today's episode explores what it takes to build truly empowered teams, adopt emerging technologies effectively, and create scalable learning ecosystems across the organization. Microsoft's 2025 Work Trend Index introduced the concept of work charts, a new kind of map for how work actually gets done, not who reports to who, not who contributes what, how collaboration flows across teams, tools, and skills, which raises a really big question. How do we build capabilities to operate that way at the personal level, at the organizational level? That's why I wanted today's conversation with Alex Adamopoulos, CEO of Emergn, a company that helps organizations redesign how they work by embedding product thinking and continuous learning into everyday operations. Alex, welcome to the Future of Less Work.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining me. I was really curious because we talk a lot about how work, we form projects around work with start and end dates and specific teams and deliverables and schedules. And I've heard you talk about the shift to product-based models from project-based models. Teams are more stable, they focus on long-term value. Can you walk us through the difference between project-based and product-based and why it matters?
I can. I mean, at the simplest level, I would say that if you are a traditional project manager, and if this is what you've done as a career, this is what you're involved with, then you're used to something called annual planning. So when we do projects, we look at them annually. That's how we set our business case. That's how we do our budgets. The difference between project and product management at the simplest level, how I describe it is annual planning for project, quarterly adaptive planning for product, meaning the product mindset is about being iterative and looking at how you create value in increments. So in this case, let's say every 90 days, every quarter, we have to demonstrate that the work that we're doing is producing some kind of tangible value, which means we're also saying we're okay with uncertainty and we would shift if we had to and maybe change the scope or change the budget.
Okay, so you're taking, a page from the whole kind of agile concept of how we did, we learned that with software, right? That we need to stay more connected, um, flexible and adapt as we go. And you're basically saying, let's move the whole way we work to this kind of concept.
I am. So traditional product managers maybe 10 years ago weren't applying, IT methodologies like Scrum, on the agile side. They were just kind of going along with doing their product management role. So market analysis, research, working with the departments in the company or IT. But what happened about a decade ago, this whole shift got a name and they called it project to product. And this shift represented, okay, how do we take schools of thought like you mentioned agile, but how do you take principles from the world of lean or design thinking or systems thinking? And how do we now just make it more of a flat line, look, a flat organization and say, great, we're not going to get hung up on where people sit in the company. Similar to the report you were mentioning from Microsoft, we're going to get more informed about how we produce valuable work. And to do that, we're just going to have to think differently, maybe even do some of the things IT historically has been doing with Agile. Why can't we apply these same principles on the product, on the business side?
So, what does that look like in practice? Because I know we've been talking about networked organizations as opposed to
Uh-huh.
hierarchical structures for a really long time. And it's really hard to shift the organization to be able to work that way. So the autonomous teams concept.
So, what it looks like is this idea of what some people call fusion teams or stream aligned teams. These things all have like lots of names and popular buzzwords, as you can imagine. So let's just pick the word fusion team for a second, the phrase. What we're saying is instead of having IT work on something that the product and the business has given them, why don't we formulate teams that actually have representation from all aspects of the company, all centered around the delivery or the building of a product? So let's say we're going to design, a new mobile device, right? Well, the Fusion team has someone from sales, marketing, finance, IT, and the business all working around that mobile device. So
Versus the
every
handoffs that used to happen, right? It used to be, somebody defined it, handed it off, somebody built it, handed it off, or designed it first, handed it off, build it, hand it off to sales and marketing. And you're saying, no, actually pull everybody together from the start.
pull everyone together because fusion teams are actually accelerated ways of building. They hold people more accountable, and you're actually able to see, again, more tangible outcomes sooner. I mean, just back to the project product thing, right? Another way to understand it is in project, we delegate tasks. In product, we delegate outcomes. So tasks are things that, obviously as a project manager, you're checking your box in your project plan. It doesn't mean that the outcome is the right one or is the
Give me
most
a
valuable one.
practical example, a difference between a task and an outcome.
Well, a task could be that I have to build, this line of code because the business team needs a drop down on their app to have these selections for, I don't know,
Yeah. So
type of
basically,
product.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
right? Okay. An outcome might be that the outcome in that scenario wouldn't be the drop down list. It would be that the selection of a particular item in that drop down leads to something or a call to action, leads to some decision making that would have to be done on the part of a customer. So in product teams, we're always looking at customer first,
Yeah, the for
not
what? The what kind
delivery.
of the end goal. So you're basically saying, okay, really, it's not about the drop down menu, it's about the customer's ability to choose something and maybe limiting the number of choices. And now how do you do that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just to be candid, right? Who cares if the project plan was done specifically as initially thought? If you, as the client, don't see value from it, we've missed the mark.
Okay, so let's talk about skill sets, right? Because
Mhm.
ultimately, marketing people, they were not taught, right, to have an input at the design phase or the development phase of a product. What
Right.
does that mean for how we need to think of our kind of skill set and then, as an organization, bring people on board and up to where we need them to be?
Well, it means a few things, right? The first thing I would say is we have to understand, like, what are the attributes of a product? What do we mean when we say product, right? A product can serve external or internal customers, as we obviously would assume. It's defined by its business capabilities, not the IT organization. It delivers capabilities that the customer values. So again, the customer has to tell us that this matters to them. We can't just assume it does. It could be a repeatable service. It can be a platform. It can be bought, sold, subscribed, or funded a particular
That's
way. So
not different than anything we used to do. I mean, you kind of need to define whatever it is you're, even in the very beginning when you're defining what it is that you're going to design now.
exactly. And then when you have the attributes in mind, as you say, some of the skill sets that we need to have would be things that would require a significant mindset shift. So mindset shifts are, I would say, predominant. So, for example, um, the culture will change, right? We have to be able to answer three things: Are we delivering value early and often? We would only know that if we were working a particular way that we didn't used to work. So, for example, when you do market analysis as a product manager or you're doing research and you're getting that research from the client, you have to be able to test and learn the ideas or the inputs that you're getting to see if they're resonating with clients. So, test and learn is a principle that modern product managers practice very well. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
they get
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because
no,
I'm
no, please.
processing this, having grown up um, in an organization that did, basically the design and the development and the manufacturing. And I'm thinking, you're basically saying, okay, if we bring in the marketing folks early, right? Or a
Mhm.
perspective, right? Then somebody would have a different kind of conversation on, do we do this feature or that feature, the priorities in the design phase. It just feels like there's a lot of I don't know, waste. It's like I'm thinking that what the marketing people say, we're not fully loaded at this phase. Why would we spend time here?
Oh no, you're on the right track. The word waste is central here. There's a lot of waste in the process, right? Because traditionally we fund for the long term, but with product mindsets, when we talk about product excellence today in companies, we're funding for short term, not long term. Meaning, it's almost like Shark Tank. We have to go back in front and prove, hey, we've got a viable business here. Can I get another check? Not here's the whole check. Come to me in a year and let's see what you've developed. So teaching organizations to think incrementally and also to prioritize differently. So here's one I'll give you that I love. Um, you and I would have grown up with NPVs, right? Uh, Net present value business cases, which are very common in projects. I would say those are not necessary. How about we look at it from a cost of delay perspective? So let's say that's a different algorithm. What if I could come to you and say to you, hey, this project we're working on, we're building this product, and it's made up of many, mini projects. We now know through analysis that for every day or every week, if maybe the week is the right measure, that we miss the delivery of a feature, it's going to cost us 350,000 a week, 1 million a week. So what we've been able to do with large global enterprise companies now for the last 15 years is we show them the cost of delay in not delivering what they're setting out to deliver. In other words, because you've been looking at it as a project, we reverse engineering and say for every week that goes by, it's costing you this much by not delivering sooner.
Yeah, you're basically saying, okay, I might be bringing in a marketing person before marketing gets done, but I'm making sure that you end up bringing in the customer's perspective a lot sooner. And so you will not deliver a product that nobody needs or, invest in features that nobody's going to pay for.
Yeah, it's a little bit unorthodox because it's a comfort zone thing. If we're used to governing for certainty, because we have a project plan. It's certain. We've signed off. We're promoting. How about governing for uncertainty, right? How about having the courage to say we're going to do so much, but then we're going to be able to be agile and nimble and shift if we are going down a path that we've discovered. Hey, this is not the most valuable path.
So
And
one of the things that I saw you talk about in this context is actually the need to bring training in into the workflow on a real time basis, right? I mean, we usually take people outside of the work to train them for something that they maybe will need
Mhm.
tomorrow, or that's the good scenario, or maybe we should have trained them before. And what you're doing with Praxis, I think, is different. It's building the capability into the workflow
Yes,
into the real time. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can. So for the last 15 years or so, we took a different angle at helping companies become more product centric. We said, look, it has to be about your people, not just your process. So there's this old triangle we all grew up with, which is people, process, and technology. We emphasize the people part the most. The other two are equally important, but people and capability development solves a number of things: talent gaps, retention, skills that you need in the business. So,
Which, by the way,
Prax,
today is kind of because I'm thinking in today's conversation with
yeah,
AI, right? Everybody's
yeah.
talking about the technology. In fact, everybody's saying, let's bring in the agents and remove, as many people as we can from the equation.
Well, one of my favorite reports that MIT Sloan Management School came out with, actually in the last couple of years, was they said only 10% of companies realize significant financial gains from AI. Only 10%. The other 90 that don't are the ones that did not implement iterative experimentation, robust product management. That whole governing for uncertainty, the things we're talking about,
Yes.
because you can't adopt new tech just because you say I'm going to buy it off the shelf and I'm going to be this AI company. You have to know how to interact with it. So Praxis was designed from the ground up off of the work that we've done with our clients, for 15 years. And given that most of our clients are everyone from Fortune 1 up to Global 2000, we kind of took all that learning and said, how would you then bring that back into a capability development platform? So we've had this B2B, which is now also has a B2C element, platform in the market for a long time. And we use it to upskill and reskill teams quickly, because the faster that you can get organizations up to skill themselves, then they own their own transformation. They get past this whole thing called transformation fatigue that we talk about.
Yeah,
And
that's clear, but I want to dive into the details a little bit because again, one of these things we
yeah,
keep talking about, right? Training is a real issue. We know it's a
hmm
real issue right now. Bringing people upskilling, reskilling, or just giving them the tools they need to be able to use the new tools that are coming in at a really big speed, right? That's critical. That's central. And we still think of training as something where you step away from your work and you go learn something. And in today's environment, by the time you've come back to your desk, 15 new things came out. So, how do you bring in the training into the process, into the real work?
so we use a learning model called the 70-20-10 model. This was invented in the late 60s, would you believe it? And essentially, what it taught us then, the research showed that only 10% of learning is done in the classroom.
Yeah.
And yet, that's exactly what we've done since,
Yes.
and before. So we reversed it, of course, and we take the
And
70.
20% is from people, and then 70% is on the job.
Exactly. So
Just
we
spit it
practice
in.
this thing called work-based learning, where that 70% is done on real work. So the within the first week of people interacting with the courses and the content and the tools and Praxis, and even our coaches or our teams, within the first week, they're getting productive because they're applying it to real work. And that's how we've seen it stick, and that's how we've seen it last. To your point, I won't name them, but there are organizations out there in our world that offer certification in 2 days. I don't know anyone that can be certified in 2 days and then take that learning back and be effective in the
So
organization.
what
You
does
have to
that
be able to
mean?
learn.
So maybe I'm looking for the example or for what that looks like because
Mhm.
we also know that um it's very hard for people to stop eh, the work and go learn what they need to do to maybe come back and do it differently because it takes longer.
Yeah. Well, with us, the way we do it in our organization with clients is, they get access to the courses and the tools. It's either self-paced learning, so they do it on their own, and they're applying those things on the job. Or if they're working with us in an enterprise way where we've applied a team, then they have weekly check-ins with our coaches who are essentially checking the homework and looking at what they're doing and validating that's being applied correctly. And that's where they're getting any course correction or guidelines or insights. But again, it's more than that because we need to prove that the learning works. And the only way you can prove is if you're doing it on real work and you can see the tangible outcome of what you just did this past week.
Yeah, and you need it in the real time. I mean, I know part of the challenge, and I've had this conversation with a CEO recently, is they've got a team working on video, right? In the old days, you wrote a script, you hired actors, you did the whole thing, right? And today,
Yeah.
you need to go do it with the tools, but they're used to they're used to working, and it takes them longer because they have to figure out which tool and how it works, and how to do it, and so it's building that into the workflow in a way that you can't go back to what you used to do.
No, and when you hear the phrase product management, it's not as exciting as AI as a phrase, but yet it's just fundamental now to our future. Even I found it interesting that the World Economic Forum in their future of jobs report said there are three jobs that are going to matter most, in the future. The first one was product management. The second one was AI related skills, and the third one had to do with business analysis. Right. So I'm not surprised. Actually, what's really nice is I feel like for the last 10 years we've been so deep in this kind of work, and now we're seeing all these external media outlets and research agencies saying, okay, we get it. Like, we have to be better at building end to end products, but we need a different mindset to do it. So one of the key things about Praxis, I call it the craft of product management because it teaches product discovery, which you need to know what that discovery mindset looks like. It teaches product delivery, so how to actually do all this work, and it teaches product strategy. So without those three, you can't become the ultimate product manager. And
Yeah.
sometimes what we see is people maybe focus on one or more, but you really need the complete toolbox, if you will, to get it
Yeah,
right.
yeah, and I've been thinking as you describe this, what this means for leaders, right? How's that
Mhm.
changing how we are supposed to lead these days? What would you say to leaders listening to us?
I would tell leaders in organizations like C suites, especially, that um, they need to democratize their digital budgets. They need to realize that the research is now telling us that, boards and C suites now are looking at IT spending and saying, wait a minute, if we're going to compete in a digital economy, this bucket of money needs to be discussed in the business. We have to come together as an organization. I saw one research report by Gartner that said nearly half or 50% of board directors that they interviewed have now asked for digital business related budgets to be moved into business areas. So it's not that IT doesn't matter, of course, but they want to be in the conversation. They're demanding it.
Yeah, yeah, we was referring to Microsoft's index report. They actually were talking about the same thing in terms of they called intelligence resources. So you talk about
Right.
IT and HR, right? And IT was about the systems and tools, and HR is about the people. But if your intelligence today is the combined resources of the people you have and the tools you have, right? Suddenly you've got a completely different way of looking at your resources.
Yeah, and the other thing I would tell leaders is, I'm old enough to remember in my career that everyone's been talking about the classic business and IT alignment issue. I think this whole end-to-end product mindset can solve that alignment issue. When we did our research study last year on transformation fatigue, and we got back all the survey results, we spoke to, I think, over 700 global companies. I wasn't surprised by the data, but one of the statistics that came back that really shocked me is, like, 50% of employees want to quit because they're just so weary and tired of all the constant change or the lack of progress because they don't see how they're going to move. And you mentioned leaders. I don't know what you see, but another challenge we have with leaders today, and it's not them themselves, but companies are reorging all the time. So
Yeah.
every time you've got new teams that come in, they kind of put a pause on what was working or not working, and then we restart again. And that's a
Yeah,
challenge.
and change fatigue is a real thing, and we know it. And I know your data showed that as
Yeah.
well. And if we see it all over, and change is coming at us, from all sorts of places. You talk about the reorgs, but there's also the AI and the tools and the idea that everything's speeding up. What is the fix, or how does looking at things this way change that?
Well, I think the fix is being able to recognize that there are certain things that you can do in your organization now to make progress. And some of those things, of course, we've been talking about as being, related to product management. But for example, you can immediately decide that you're going to look at value differently. So how do we define value? Because unfortunately, it's context sensitive. Value is different for every organization. So coming up with different value metrics, or being able to go in and say, okay, let's take one product, one big program that we have that we're going to go do. Let's put that through a different set of criteria and let's see what comes. I think companies need to have the courage to test some of these things to see what the art of the possible is, and then they'll have the willingness to go further.
Yeah, I think what I really like about what you're describing, and I agree with you that it is, if at least for the bigger companies, needs to go into pilot mode, right? Which makes it smaller and manageable. Is that the rate of change doesn't allow us to, for example, reorg ourselves every time we need to think differently, and we know that we create these hierarchical boundaries, so you don't move the right people to the right jobs at the right time with the right skills at the pace you need to be able to do that, right? Because they belong to someone. We still have ownership models, right? My employees, my team, my, indicators of success. And you're basically saying, no, let's look at the outcome, which ultimately is that product or service that we're delivering, and align everyone to that.
Yeah, like don't organize by function anymore. Organize by a product. Organize your teams around a product idea or a value stream. Don't fund for your capability, for the long term. Don't just fund a project for the sake of a project. Like be willing to draw the line in the sand a little shorter in case you have to shift. And I think with AI in the mix, like one thing that we see a lot with AI adoption is companies are struggling to define what it means for them. But even on our platform Praxis, we have a Praxis AI component where we actually introduce tools that product managers can use to accelerate the completion of a task using a very similar feature like you would see in like an LLM like Gemini,
Yeah.
ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
So if a product manager needs to build I don't know, a competitive analysis or a customer profile, they can now do this in minutes. And
Yeah.
this is the way that you empower the tech to work with the people and the learning versus just giving them the tech and saying, figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So I always end these conversations with asking, instead of an answer, for a question. So here's what I want to ask
Mhm.
you. What's the one question you think we should all be asking about the future of work?
So the one question I ask clients all the time is if you had a great idea today, how long would it take you to get it into the hands of a customer?
Yeah, I'm curious. What do they usually say?
So in 15 years, I've never gotten a single response because nobody knows.
They
And the
don't know.
reason they don't know is because the way they traditionally work, they haven't been able to define certain parameters and working in this product mindset that could give them that answer. And yet, the companies we work with where we've solved that and now they have answers have seen dramatic improvements, which we're very proud of and we don't take it for granted. But that's the question I ask because I think it's an important question.
So you're asking the question because you think that they need to be able to know how quickly they can deliver and maybe then iterate versus do the old planning
Yes,
schedule at time.
exactly. I asked it because I know and have seen through evidence that if you do know the answer, you can essentially have a much more predictive rate of success than doing it the traditional way. And
Yeah.
what we're trying to do is help people solve that so they can get to their outcomes better.
Wonderful. That's a really good question. So thank you, Alex, for joining me today. For more about Alex and Emergn, check out the links in the podcast description. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow The Future of Less Work wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, your best people do not work because they have to. They don't work because you tell them to, nor because you measure them on it. They work because they want to. Because by working for you, it's their way to achieve their purpose in life. Till next time.